Good morning. Happy Monday. We are back on the back deck. Beautiful day. There's a birds. Hear that? Hear that one? That's pretty cool. Um, and then from my experience in ornithology, I can tell you with certainty that is, in fact, yeah, that's a bird. That is definitely a bird. So, beautiful day. We are in, as we get started today, we are in, I got to, let me start over. To be really honest, Acts chapter 7, which is where we are today, is a chapter that for most of my life I have kind of hurried through. Normally, when I come to Acts chapter 7, if I'm reading and I'm reading as part of a reading plan, I'm supposed to be knocking out, 3 chapters that day. And I look at Acts 7 and I see, man, that's a lot of verses. We better push through. And we also look at it and go, okay, this is one more of those recapping of the Old Testament. If you go through the New Testament, a lot of times you'll find recapping of the Hebrew Bible of the Israelites' journey and just retelling of a lot of Genesis and Exodus. And I'm like, it's another one of those. Let me just read it real fast and move on. But as we're studying at this time, I'm digging in a little deeper, and I'm seeing that this section, this chapters 6, 7, and 8, and maybe a little bit 6, 7, 8 specifically, is a key transition. As this is a hugely important section in the book of Acts and in the life of the church in ways that I had never really thought about before. We talked last week, as we did Acts chapter 6, how there was this move to organization in a very positive way and fulfilling the mission through organization. And Acts 7 is theologically is crucial. This is a theologically huge chapter because of what Stephen does. Now, last week we saw that Stephen has come on, that they appoint him as, we call it a deacon. It's not ever called that in Acts chapter 6, but he's appointed in a leadership role, primarily in service, but he's got gifts in teaching and preaching, and he uses those gifts, and he ticks off some people. So much so that he gets called before the Sanhedrin, the religious body that governs everything. And it says at the end of it, that end of chapter 6, that his face was like the face of an angel. One of the things we pointed out was that we think, oh, that's angelic. No, angels bring messages. Most of the time when somebody saw an angel in the Hebrew Bible, they just drop to the ground on their face. Even in the New Testament, when somebody sees an angel, they drop to the ground because angels have important messages. Okay? And what is going on, what they're saying is, he has been denigrating Moses and the temple. He's committing blasphemy by attacking the temple and attacking Moses. And he is not going to affirm that command, but he's not going to fully dismiss it. He's actually going to show us the basis for what they say, but then in the process he takes us somewhere new. This is some incredible stuff, because let that pass. Love the birds, hate the trucks. Balance of being on the back deck. He has a radical new theology. His assumptions are things that some are shared by the original apostles, but he's going to take it a new place. This is, I don't know whether it's because he's a Greek Jew, because he's sort of second generation Christian, apparently. There's no mention of him having been with Jesus, so he's got a different viewpoint on things. And he gives us a real theological bridge from from early Christian theology to everything that follows. Everything that follows Stephen is built on his interpretation, the way he looks at the church history and God's history throughout everything. Okay, so, and he's all okay. So let's just go start reading. I'm going to read it in big chunks. We're not going to go little word by word a lot. We're going to go big chunks, and I'm going to show you what he's doing, and it's fascinating. Okay, so they bring Stephen before the Sanhedrin. His face is like the face of an angel. And the high priest said, are these things so? Are you really denigrating Moses and committing blasphemy by the way you're talking about the temple? And Stephen says, brothers and sisters, hear me. Now he's going to do a recap of sections of Jewish history. Brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, Go out from your land and from your kindred, and go into the land that I will show you. Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession, and to his offspring after him, though he had no child. And God spoke to it this effect, that his offspring would be sojourners, people who stay in a land that they're not citizens of, okay, would be sojourners in a land belonging to others, who would enslave them and afflict them 400 years. But I will judge the nation that they serve, said God, and after that they shall come out and worship me in this place. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision, and so Abraham became the father of Isaac, and circumcised him on the 8th day, and Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob the 12 patriarchs. So, at the very beginning, it just seems like a very basic recap of the origin of Jewish history. We've got Abraham, the father of Judaism. We've got him circumcising his son and the grandson. We've got the beginnings of this. We've got them moving from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran on into the promised land. But there is a huge thing going on here. Number one, God speaks to Abraham when he's not in Israel. This is the theme that's going to recur throughout the speech, the sermon. God is speaking. They are not in Israel. But God is working. He is working massively and mightily. And he is fully present in locations outside of Israel. Matter of fact, his presence almost seems to diminish once they get to Israel. And the other emphasis is, well, even though they're in Israel, this is not the promised, they don't own it yet. This is not their land. They are, even in this property, still sojourners, still non-citizens, okay? In verse 9, and the patriarchs would be the 11 of the 12 sons of Israel, of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, always make sure to get that right, jealous of Joseph, sold him into Egypt. We're still in Genesis. But God was with him and rescued him out of all of his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who made him ruler over Egypt and over all his household. Now, where are we? Okay, if you remember this story, just to recap it, Abraham moves from Ur of the Chaldees. He moves to the promised land. He has one son late in life, Isaac. Isaac has a primary son named Jacob. He has two sons. Jacob gets renamed Israel, so Jacob, Israel, same name, same person, I should say. And then Jacob/Israel has 12 sons. The next to last of those sons is named Joseph. Joseph is a very special person, very everything positive. Joseph has it. I mean, and his other 10 brothers. The baby isn't in the picture yet, Benjamin, but he's got 10 brothers, then him, then his baby brother Benjamin. The 10 brothers are incredibly jealous. They each have different moms than Joseph. Joseph is the favorite. Joseph is a spoiled brat in a lot of ways. They see that and they persecute him. They eventually stage a fake death and sell him into slavery, and he gets sent to Egypt. Okay, so he is now living in Egypt. And so what's happening? They send him to Egypt. So where is the narrative gone? The narrative has moved from the promised land, where it was for that long, to Egypt, another foreign country. Okay? And he gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh. See, God is working in a place that's not Israel. God rescued him out of all his afflictions, gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who made him ruler over Egypt and over all his household. So God is working outside of the promised land. God is working in Egypt. Now there came a famine throughout all Egypt and Canaan and great affliction, and our fathers could find no food. Oh, where are they going to go for help? Okay? But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our fathers on their first visit. And on the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and Joseph's family became known to Pharaoh. And Joseph sent and summoned Jacob his father and all his kindred, 75 persons in all. And Jacob went down into Egypt. So Joseph is in Egypt. Now the entire promised line has moved to Egypt. Where is God at? Egypt. Where is God working? Egypt. Where does salvation come from? Egypt. Not Israel, not the promised land. Okay? And Jacob went down to Egypt, and he died, he and our fathers, and they were carried back to Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a sum of silver from the sons of Hamor in Shechem. Now, when it's time to bury them, they take them back to the promised land, but they don't own the promised land. He's very specific about the idea that it's not their home. They don't live there. They don't own it. They had to buy grave sites. Okay? If you own a huge amount of property, you don't have to buy the land for a cemetery. You already own the cemetery. Well, the original Jewish people, the sons of Israel, the patriarchs, don't own any land in Israel except for a cemetery that they purchased from the rightful owners, the people who live there and own the place. So God is working. They're not in Israel, and they don't own the promised land. Do you see a theme pulling up here? Now it's going to start shifting. We've established a theme. God doesn't need this land in order to work. God doesn't need this place, and almost implied this temple, in order to be present. But as the time of the promise drew near, verse 17, which God had granted to Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt, until there arose over Egypt another king who did not know Joseph. He dealt shrewdly with our race and forced our fathers to expose their infants. And if you go back to the very beginning of Exodus, some of the stuff is phrase for phrase out of the first part of Exodus, where Israelites continue to grow. The Pharaoh comes who doesn't know Joseph because generations have passed, hundreds of years have passed, and they make the Israelites slaves, and the Israelites our population is blowing up, so much so that they're afraid that the Israelites are going to try to take over. So they make a law that they have to expose the baby boys have to be just set out to die. That was what happens. Okay. So at that time Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight. Okay, we got a very specific. There's a focus. We're going to see that there's this. Remember, we were talking about his problem was Moses and the temple. So here he's going to start talking about Moses. Moses was beautiful in God's sight. So we're not talking bad about Moses. The problem is not that Stephen talks bad about Moses. He was brought up for 3 months in his father's house, and then he was exposed. He was put in a basket in the river, okay? And he was exposed. And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her son. He's brought up what? As the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the grandson of Pharaoh. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. He was mighty in word and deed, even though he was not brought up in a Jewish household. Okay, he is in a great sense a foreigner. He is a non-Jew. He's very special. Talks all he's mighty in words, mighty in deeds, beautiful in God's sight. Not very Jewish. Not very Jewish. Okay, verse 23. When he was 40 years old, it came to his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. He didn't live with the Jews. He lived in the palace. He then comes to visit his brothers. Okay. Verse 24, and seeing one of them being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was going to give them salvation by his hand, but they did not understand. He has come to rescue the Jews, and they don't like it. Okay. And on the following day, he appeared to them as they were quarreling and tried to reconcile them, saying, men, you are brothers, why do you wrong each other? But the man who was wronging his neighbor thrust him aside, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? At this retort, Moses fled and became an exile in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. So he tries to help his Jewish brothers, and he is rejected. Does that remind you of anyone? Stephen is portraying Moses as the predecessor to Jesus. Okay, we'll talk about that more as we go, because you're going to see it very, very clearly. That's what's going on here. Now, when 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in a flame of fire in a bush. And again, where's he at? He's in Midian. Where is he not? He's in Israel. What just happened? The presence of God appears to Moses. The voice of God comes to Moses, not in Israel, not in the temple. Okay? Here's God's presence, not in Israel. Verse 31, when Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight, and as he drew near to look, there came the voice of the Lord, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses trembled, did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, take off the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Holy ground. And where's it not? It's not in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. It is holy ground. It is the place where God is right now. God's presence is being manifest in this spot, not in Israel, and it is holy ground. It is the holiest place on earth at that moment, is that spot, not in Israel, okay? I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their groaning, and I have come to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt. And now God has sent two people to accomplish his mission, and neither one came from Israel, from the Holy Land, from the Promised Land, when they were sent. Abraham was sent from Ur and Haran. Moses is sent from the wilderness in Midian. Okay? And in verse 35, this Moses, now this is where he makes the other point very, very clear. This Moses whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge? This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. So we've got Moses as the ruler, and the big word, redeemer. Who's the redeemer? Jesus Christ is the redeemer. And he's rejected by the people. A ruler and redeemer who's rejected. The parallel between Moses and Jesus that Stephen is making is really clear, at least to us looking back at it. This man, Moses, led them out, verse 36, performing wonders and signs in Egypt and at the Red Sea and in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the Israelites, now this is it, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. Boom, there it is. God's going to raise up a prophet like me. And one thing we don't understand, that's Deuteronomy 18:15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. We don't think of this. For some reason, it doesn't enter into our equations. But this is one of the most dominant messianic prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. This is one they leaned on. If you we've talked before, especially when I'm doing the study in Revelation, about how much of the prophecy about Messiah was hidden stuff that the Jews didn't understand and didn't recognize, okay? And of the things they did recognize, there were like 2 or 3 that were dominant. One of them was that Elijah would come first, and the second was Messiah is the second Moses, okay? Elijah comes first. That's John the Baptist, we believe, and so the New Testament teaches. And then followed by the new Moses, the prophet like Moses, and that's Jesus. And now Jesus is, in a very real sense, in Stephen's theology, and this is huge. This is earth-shaking. Jesus is the new Moses, which means in a very real sense, Jesus is replacing Moses. He's the new Moses. So Stephen can't be denigrating Moses. He's simply saying this is the fulfillment of Moses, okay? I don't think the apostles had even internalized this. I don't think the 12, Peter and James and John, I don't think they had internalized this just yet. I think they may have known it here, but I believe they didn't have it here. They really didn't get that Jesus was the replacement of Moses. They were still, if you look at a lot of their speeches, they're still bringing Moses to the table. And Stephen is saying in a very subtle way, but a very powerful way, that Moses has been replaced. Okay? Let's keep reading. This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai with our fathers. He received living oracles to give to us, but our fathers refused to obey him, but thrust him aside, and in their hearts they turned to Egypt. And saying to Aaron, make for us gods who will go before us. Remember this, Moses is up on the mountain, getting the 10 commandments and the rest of the law. The people are in the valley, waiting for him to come down. They get impatient, and Aaron, Moses' brother, makes them a golden calf to worship in its place. Don't know where he's become of. Verse 41, they made a calf in those days and offered a sacrifice to the idol, and were rejoicing in the works of their hands. But God turned away and gave them over to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. Did you bring me slain beasts and sacrifices during the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You took up the tent of Moloch, the star of your god Rephaim, so foreign gods, the images you made to worship, and I will send you into exile beyond Babylon. So even as they are getting the law, they are setting up their ultimate exile. They are rejecting God, worshiping idols, and he is setting something up. Verse 44, our fathers had the tent of witness in the wilderness, just as he who had spoke to Moses directed him to make it, according to the pattern they had seen. So they had, as they're going in the wilderness, coming off the mountain, God gives them a pattern for a tabernacle. A tabernacle was a portable temple. It had the Ark of the Covenant, which represented, and in many, many cases actually contained, in some sense, the presence of God. So God's presence is with them and portable, goes wherever they need him to go. Okay. Our fathers, in turn, brought it with Joshua when they dispossessed the nations that God drove out before. Fathers, when they move into Israel, they bring the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. So it was until the days of David, who found favor in the sight of God and asked to find a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. Now, we've covered a ton of his history, and there's been a ton of the presence of God and the work of God, and what have they not had? We're about to find out. But it was Solomon who built a house for him. So they finally get a temple. The temple, Stephen is pointing out, is late. The process has gone on for a long time before they finally get a permanent residence for God, before they get a permanent temple. And then Stephen immediately, I think, pulls down the value of the temple just a little bit. Yet the Most High does not dwell in houses made by hands. As the prophet says, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or what is the place of my rest? Did not my hand make all these things? In other words, it's a real silly thing to try to build a house for God. We can't build a house for God because God's basic concept, help us understand it, is God's too big to fit in your dollhouse. Okay, so they make the temple, and what's happened is the Jews have made the temple the center of worship, the center of God's presence, the center of everything is the temple. Okay, but Stephen has said over and over throughout this whole process, the tabernacle, which was portable, is just as valuable as the temple, maybe even superior because it's portable. And as we've saw throughout his speech, God's presence was wherever God wanted his presence to be. His power was wherever he wanted his power to be. His calling, his vocations were given out wherever he wanted to give them out. Okay? The presence of God is not in the facilities, is what he's been saying. And the Jews have made the temple the center of worship. That's why they're going to be so distraught when the temple's destroyed in AD 70, because that's the centerpiece of Judaism to them at that point. And so Stephen is saying that temple is just a building. The important thing is God lives there. Okay? Chrysostom was an very early Christian teacher and father. And he's talking about how Moses was educated in Egypt, in the Egyptian palace, and when God appeared to him in the desert of Midian, here's the quote, there's not a word of temple, not a word of sacrifice. Then he says it twice, and then he says, in fact, the holy ground at the burning bush was far more wonderful than the Holy of Holies. Okay? God is everywhere present, and the holy place is there wherever God may be. And Stephen is returning them to this early teaching and saying this whole section where we've said the temple is the place, the temple is where God lives. That's not accurate. The temple is where God is. Doesn't matter about the sacrifices as much as it is the presence of God. It has nothing to do with geography and everything to do with the presence of God, God revealing himself in a spot. Matter of fact, he is implying strongly, I believe, that the temple has become a place of idolatry because they have replaced the worship of God with the worship of a location. They are worshiping the location. Matter of fact, they'd referred to it earlier. He said bad things about the temple, and they called that blasphemy. Oh, blasphemy is where is saying bad things about God, not a building. And Stephen is very strongly saying that. It reminds me of Ezekiel chapters 8 through 10. And Ezekiel chapter 8, Ezekiel describes and sees idolatry in the temple. And in chapters 9 and 10, the presence of God leaves the temple completely. Before it's destroyed, the presence of God leaves. Now, what are his main points of this sermon? We've said them a bunch, but let's recap them. God's presence isn't limited to any one location. It doesn't have to be in the promised land. The important thing is his presence, not the geography of where he's appearing. Jesus is the new Moses. Jesus is replacing Moses. And the third thing, temple worship has become for a lot of people idolatry. And here's the thing. In some sense, when they said that he was denigrating Moses and the temple, if you look at it one way, they were right. But if you look at it in the more important way, they're completely wrong. In some sense, they're correct in their accusation, but in the ultimate sense, they're completely mistaken. John Calvin put it this way. No harm can be done to the temple and the law when Christ is openly established as the end and truth of both. If Jesus is the fulfillment of the temple, if Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, if Jesus is the new Moses, then there's no way they can say bad things about the temple and about Moses, because Jesus is the fulfillment of those things. Okay? So, they understood this. The way they act tells me they understood what he's just said. He's just said Jesus is the new Moses, and he said it. And the temple is not the centerpiece of faith. God's presence is the centerpiece of faith. And when he says that, they are massively upset, and he then provokes them. He then turns to them and says, "You stiff-necked people." Now, got it. Remember, or just a thing to make sure you know this. Stiff-necked is one of God's favorite things, quote unquote, in the Hebrew Bible for addressing people who are rejecting God. Stiff-necked, you're only looking one direction. You're not willing to look over there, repent, and turn to God. And so he calls them stiff-necked. You are stiff-necked, uncircumcised in heart. You've been physically circumcised, but in your heart you're not. That's another pushback to Ezekiel, by the way. In heart and ears. You always resist the Holy Spirit as your fathers did, so do you. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one. Who's the righteous one? Jesus. Who is Jesus the fulfillment of? Moses, whom you have betrayed and murdered. You who received the law as delivered by angels and did not keep it. You got the law and you rejected it as you rejected Jesus. But even before that, as you rejected the presence of God by pointing to a building instead of the presence of God. And God said, this is icing on the cake. It's nothing new to his argument, but it provokes him. And that's the reason they stoned him right then. I think, had he not done this last piece, it's probable, my opinion, no evidence, except just an opinion, okay? They probably would have had him executed, but they would have done it judiciously. Remember, they were a judicial body. But with that last statement saying, you are the ones who have been doing all these evil things, you are the stiff-necked people, you are the ones who are actually rejecting God, it moves them from a judicial body to a lynch mob. Okay, they go from judicial body to lynch mob because his teaching has been accurate. He is accurately assessing the Hebrew Bible and the history of God in a way that makes them insanely uncomfortable. And so they then, verse 54, let me just finish the chapter. When they heard these things, they were enraged. They ground their teeth at him. That is ticked off. You're grounding your teeth. But he, full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. If they weren't upset enough, they are now. But they cried out with a loud voice, stopped their ears, and rushed together at him. Then they cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of a young man named Saul. Big introduction. And as they were stoning Stephen, he called out, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. And falling to his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, Lord, do not hold this sin against them, echoing Jesus on the cross. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. And you know why he fell asleep? When Jesus realized his work was done, he gave up the ghost. Now, Stephen's not giving up the ghost. He doesn't have that kind of control. But that's the picture you're getting, that Stephen's work is done. Okay? As a guy, Fernando's a commentator, he said, that's his last name. He said, we do not know whether he himself realized this, but his work was done. He freed Christianity from the temple and therefore from Judaism. This is the final break from Judaism for Christianity. This is, like I said, this is huge. He has just laid the theological foundation for them to move away from temple. Remember, they were always going back to the temple. That was the centerpiece of their entire operation, was the temple up to this point. Now he's freed them from that, both theologically by the argument that he gave, which was powerful and strong, and also by the fact that they're probably not that welcome in the temple anymore, okay? So the church goes into a brand new phase. It starts when they appoint the new leaders, in the ones who take care of the widows thing, but out of them spring some leaders with some fresh thought, some fresh ways of viewing things, and they take the church to new places. The church is no longer Jerusalem and temple-centric. It's not about the temple. It's not about Jerusalem. It's no longer a subcategory of Judaism. We talked about how up until here, the early apostles thought they would what was actually going to happen was they were going to convert the Jewish leadership and Christianity would continue as fulfillment of Judaism. That's no longer an option. That's no longer on the table. That's done. Okay, Christianity, although it doesn't even have a name yet, is its own faith. It is distinct. The followers of Jesus are not Jews. They are Christians. The name's just waiting for it to be given to them. They also will now move to fulfill Acts 1:8, Acts 1:8, which says, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. So far, it's been months. They're only witnessing in Jerusalem because they're tied to the temple. They're no longer tied to the temple. They're now freed to go be witnesses in each of these places. Matter of fact, another new leader, another one of the guys who was appointed to take care of the widows, named Philip, will in the very next chapter take the gospel to Samaria and then take it all the way outside of Judea. Okay, so it's being fulfilled. And I think what actually happens here too is, I think the apostles have been tied so tightly that they haven't been apostles. See, an apostle is a person who is sent out. A disciple is someone, the Greek word, a disciple means a learner, someone who is learning, okay? So a disciple, a mathetes, is someone who followed a rabbi around and learned. But an apostle means sent out, specifically with a message. But the apostles haven't gone anywhere. They've not been sent out until this. And now the persecution increases, as we'll see, and the church is scattered, including the apostles. The apostles leave town now. I believe that very strongly, because when we get later on, there's not a whole lot of mentions of the apostles. They come and go very rarely. Matter of fact, when you get to Acts 15, there's a Jerusalem council, which will make a huge decision. We'll get to that in a few weeks. They'll make a huge decision about how we treat people who are not Jewish. And Peter shows up as a witness, but the council is not made up of apostles. It's made up of James, the brother of Jesus, and other leaders who have stayed as the organizing central authority structure. But the apostles seem, and according to church tradition, the apostles left. I mean, they say Thomas went to, I believe, India. So they go to different places to spread the gospel. They start living into their titles only after Stephen gives them the theological basis, which lets them leave the temple and leave Judaism. Incredibly powerful, incredibly important chapter. I am so upset at myself for missing this chapter for all these years. But that's what's going on with Stephen. Next will come Philip, who is another one of the, not one of the 12, and he'll take the ministry, as we said already. I already spoiled the next chapter. And following that, the guy that we introduced here, Saul, he'll take up the mantle, and things will go in totally new directions. And it's all because the foundation that Stephen lays here. All right, isn't that awesome? All right, have a great day.